I lived and went to college in the same city where I grew up. All my friends lived nearby. My father owned and operated a local hardware and building supply store. He wanted me to get my degree and come back to help him, and then maybe take over the store. When I was young, he made me work in the store. I spent many evenings and weekends there before high school and during college. I loved talking to the contractors who bought materials from us. When I made deliveries, I watched them build and asked them questions. I can't say I hated working in my father's store, but I didn't like it. The best part of the job was the deliveries, especially when I did them alone. I really didn't want to take over the store. When I wasn't working in the store, I, like many boys in town, mowed lawns for pocket money. One day I was working for a widow and watched as she tried to fix the outbuilding in her yard. She had a lot of problems, partly because she didn't have the right tools, partly because she wasn't strong enough for hard work, and partly because she just didn't know how to act. Finally, when I finished my work, I offered to help her. To this day, I don't know where I got the courage to insist that she hire me, but I did. I told her that it was obvious that she couldn't cope, but that I might be able to cope. I pointed out the mistakes she was making and told her she was simply not strong or tall enough for the job. I offered to do it for $50 if she bought the materials. I told her that if she didn't like my work, she didn't have to pay me. Finally, she agreed. I did the job to her satisfaction, and she paid me. But she did something more valuable for me than just giving me money. She started telling her older, single friends about my work and how well I did both renovating and mowing her lawn. I started getting calls from other women wanting me to fix something for them. I always tried to do the job right. If I didn't know something, I asked one of my contractor friends. I have always charged less than a real licensed contractor. After I worked for several older women, calls started coming in from men and families. By the time I went to college, I had a small repair business and many of the required licenses to operate. I also still had my lawn care business. Sometimes I had to hire friends to help me cope with the workload, especially in the summer. I made enough to pay for college, buy a new truck, and pay for dates. I was also able to enjoy my youth, although I must admit that I worked long hours and my dates always started later than most guys. After finishing school, I got tired of living with my parents, and I rented an apartment. I lived in an apartment my first year of college. I didn't like living in an apartment and started looking for a house to rent when my lease was up. One of my high school friends just got divorced from my best friend Joe. She caught him cheating with one of our classmates and filed for divorce. Glenda worked as a real estate agent and struggled to make ends meet. We were talking one evening, complaining about her failed marriage at our favorite place. We both lived in apartments, and neither of us liked it. I told her I was thinking about renting a house. I asked if she had inexpensive options for me. She asked how much I could pay. When I told her, she looked shocked and said, "Damn, Stan, with a 30-year loan, you could buy a pretty decent house for that money a month. Why don't you buy a house instead of renting? That way you'll be building equity instead of throwing away money for rent." I said I never thought about it. He said that I didn't have much for a down payment. "Well, let me check a few things and I'll get back to you," she said. When I left the bar, I convinced one of my older friends to buy me a beer. By the end of the evening, I had forgotten about our conversation, but she clearly had not. I think the thought of a good commission does its job. The following Monday evening, Glenda called and asked to meet her again at the bar. When I walked in, she was full of energy. Almost before I sat down, she started talking. "Stan, I found a few places that I think you can afford, but most of them are not in very good areas. I found one place for sale that you'll like. Remember Harris's old house on the edge of town?" I nodded, and she continued, "Well, when they got older, they built a new 3-car garage and made an apartment for their mother above it. I think they plan to use it for care if needed. The new garage was a few feet from the house. 2 years ago, remember, the house burned down." I nodded again, and she said, "Well, they decided not to rebuild it and moved to a retirement home here in town. The garage was barely damaged. I was talking to Etta the other day, and she said they were tired of paying taxes and maintaining the place. They wanted to sell it, and I took it for sale. There are 20 acres, and they are asking for $110,000. You will have to do some work on the garage and the apartment, but it would be great for you. The best part is that all the utilities are already there. There are new houses being built in this area, so I think some contractor will buy it and subdivide it soon. It's not multi-listed yet, so it's only been shown a couple of times. They only need about $20,000 for the first one. Down payment. Stan, the monthly payment on a 20-year loan will be about half of what you're paying in rent now, so if you can make the down payment, I think it'll be a good deal for you. I've been thinking about this for a while. I didn't have that much money, but as far as I remembered this place, I really wanted it. I told her I wanted to watch it the next evening. Later that evening, I went to my father and asked if he could lend me money for a down payment. I have to admit, he wasn't too keen on the idea, but I reminded him that the monthly payments for the land would be half the rent I was currently paying, so I could pay him back some of the money each month after I had the apartment renovated and done up suitable for life. We finally agreed that he would lend me money for a down payment if I wanted to buy the place after inspecting it. The next evening, I went to the place and fell in love with it again. Even with the charred remains of the house, it was more beautiful than I remembered. The fire did not destroy all the trees and bushes in the yard. I could see a small stream flowing below. I told Glenda to prepare an offer for $90,000. Tuesday evening after class, I received a call from Glenda. She sounded excited and said, "Stan, I can't believe it. When I presented the offer to Etta and Homer, they were going to reject it outright. I was about to leave when Etta turned to Homer and asked him if he thought you were the one." A nice young man who mowed their lawn for many years. They asked me if you did lawn maintenance in school, and when I said yes, they smiled and started telling me what a good guy you are. Anyway, they won't accept. 90,000 but made a counter offer at 975 zizzer. Isn't that great? I didn't think twice and said, "Yeah, that's great. Tell them I'll pay that amount and I want ownership at closing." The bank required my father to be the guarantor for the loan, but everything went well and I took possession of the property at the end of April. I made the necessary renovations and moved into the apartment at the beginning of June. The next few months kept me busy with a summer lawn care business and small construction projects. At this point, I had 10 employees, most of them seasonal. I had some time to meet with Patty and start cleaning up my property. After I cleared away the debris from the burned house, I asked an engineer friend to check the foundation. He decided that the foundation was fine since the second floor had not burned through, so I could use it for the renovation. This saved several $1,000s by not having to do as much excavation and pour a new foundation. The house was a small old structure of about 1,000 square feet on the ground floor. I rented an excavator and extended the foundation towards the garage. Doing almost all the work myself, I began to use my free time and extra money to build myself a nice house. I connected the house to the garage with a glass-covered gallery with a cement floor. I installed a large hot tub in the covered gallery. I put a wood stove in there for heat and ran ductwork to the rest of the house. The summer after I graduated from college, I finished building a house. It was 2,450 square feet and was built with comfort and conveniences in mind. I had stainless appliances, granite countertops, oak trim, and brick exterior. In general, it was not a McMansion, but it was a very prestigious house. I had a beautiful south-facing covered patio overlooking a small creek. I finished it for half the price it would have sold for. Patty adored him. When we got married, I was under the impression that Patty was marrying my house, not me. After what I saw last night, I doubt. By the time I graduated from college, I moved on to new construction. I had built extensions and renovated old houses and garages, but now most of my income came from new builds. I had 20 employees. Patty started working for my dad when we got engaged. After completing her degree, she became a full-time employee and assistant manager. Her father was grooming her to become a manager after he retired. I was an only child, so the business would have passed on to us when he died. I bought all the materials from my father, so the family income from my construction business increased. My wife, Patty, and I had been friends since childhood, and I thought, like most married men, that we would be together forever. Oh, of course, we had the usual quarrels like any couple, but they were minor things. When we dated in high school and later in college, we broke up, as most young couples do. We both dated others and were intimate with others during our breakups, but always came back to each other because we couldn't find anyone we loved more. I had one girl who could have been the one, but one of my friends got involved with her before we made that decision. Finally, during my senior year of college, Patty and I became an exclusive couple. I proposed to her at Christmas, and she accepted. Patty scheduled the wedding for September after our graduation. The wedding almost did not take place due to Patty's insistence on concluding a prenuptial agreement. Now I regret that we got married. Oh well, let's continue the sad story. Apparently Patty had inherited several $100,000 from her grandfather, and she, or maybe her father, didn't want me to get my hands on it. I told her I wasn't going to spend her money and was offended that she thought I'd get married for the sake of it. In any case, we didn't talk very friendly to each other that evening when she told me about the prenuptial agreement. I think now I was happy that evening my parents decided to take a ride and come see me. When Patty heard them knocking on the door, she got so angry that she ran out when I let them in. Before she walked past them, I heard her say, "You need to talk to your son, otherwise this wedding might not happen." Dad and Mom watched as she ran out to the car and drove away. I was standing with the marriage contract in my hands when they turned to me and asked what we were fighting about. I told them and Mom said, "Oh, Stan, we thought it was something big. Honey, we know you don't marry for her money, so what's the problem? Sign the damn contract and marry the girl, if you love her." Dad sat with a frown on his face and asked if he could see the contract. He studied it carefully and said, "Everything seems to be clear, except that the contract does not take into account the property that you have before marriage or a potential inheritance from us, as it was done for her. Son, why don't we show this to a lawyer and not ask him to make suggestions?" I took the contract and read it. Dad was right. It only mentioned her money and her inheritance. I started to get angry again. I agreed with him, and he said he would make an appointment with a business lawyer. I used him for my legal matters, so I guess he was my lawyer too. I made an appointment for the following Tuesday, and the lawyer agreed with Dad. He scanned the contract into the computer and made the changes discussed. When he was finished, the agreement included my property and business and any possible inheritance, as was done for Patty. I went to her house in the evening when the lawyer finished the changes. I've already signed it. When Patty and her father read the new contract, they were both angry. He looked at me and said, "Why the hell did you change the contract we prepared, young man? I thought you loved my daughter, and now you accuse her of wanting to take your house and business. You know that when you get married, this will become her home too. If, God forbid, you get divorced, don't you think she deserves a place to live?" I got angry and replied, "Yes, sir. She deserves a place to live, but it seemed fair to me and my father that if her property and possible inheritance were protected in the event of a divorce, then the same should apply to me. You will notice that everything that is accumulated during the marriage is divided equally if the marriage ends due to infidelity. In this case, everyone leaves with what they came into the marriage or inherited, and the innocent party receives 75% of the total assets accumulated after the marriage. I believe it should be some kind of compensation or punishment for treason." Patty and her father were furious over the proposed contract. Over the next few days, the situation between us was tense. I asked several times why she was so angry about the contract, because she was the one who wanted a prenuptial agreement. Patty said it was because I wanted to kick her out if I got divorced, and that she liked the house too. She didn't think it was fair that I keep the house if we divorced. I was almost ready to demand the ring back when she started to thaw. She signed the modified contract, but it took us a few weeks to get back on track. We finally forgot our anger and forgive each other for the grievances caused by the contract. We got married as planned, and for the next 2.5 years, we didn't look back or regret it. We didn't look at the others as lovers, at least I didn't. Now I know that Patty looked. I caught her yesterday. The only problem I had with Patty's job at the hardware store was the flirting she had to put up with. I admit that I was a little jealous, but I knew many men who bought from my father. They were womanizers, and Patty was a beautiful, funny woman. One of my friends, Joe, was already divorced because he couldn't keep his household in his pants. Often I would walk into the store and find him flirting with Patty. I won't say we fought about him or her flirting with other men, but we had heated discussions. Patty argued, and to some extent I agreed with her, that she needed to flirt a little to keep her clients happy. I told her that she should just be kind and friendly and not flirt. Of course, she objected to me calling her actions flirting and said that she was just being friendly. My degree was in construction management and Patty's degree was in business administration, so our degrees corresponded to our professions. Shortly after graduating from college, I decided we had enough money to build a house to sell. My father allowed me to make an exception to his rule that bills be paid in full at the end of the month. He said that since I was from a family, I could borrow up to $100,000 and pay when the house sold. However, he kept a lien on the property in case something happened to me. All other customers were required to pay in full monthly. I was good at my job, and I knew it. I was a general contractor, but used very few subcontractors. I had my own crews for framing, drywall, trim, plumbing, and electrical. I was only hired for heating and air conditioning installation. I have even used my lawn care crews to landscape and install lawns on my projects. Anyway, I used houses for sale to keep my crews busy during the off-season. I didn't want to fire my people if I didn't have to, so I tried to keep them busy. We completed the first house and sold it before the landscaping was completed. I started a second one and it sold before completion, and we completed it at the request of the new owners. Now I had enough money to build two houses at the same time. Suddenly, the business took off, and I had almost no time for the small jobs that had previously been the mainstay of my income. Between Patty's salary and my profit, we were on a high horse. We quickly became one of the highest income families in our small town of about 25,000 people. But all our successes had their price. I worked 8-10 hours a day with crews and did paperwork before and after construction. In the evenings, I met with clients and potential clients to discuss projects and close deals. Patty also began working late at the office to handle the bookkeeping. We had less and less time for each other. Often I would pass by a construction center and see her car and 2 or 3 others there. Sometimes I would walk in and there would be Joe or one of our classmates sitting and talking to her. They all worked in the construction industry and were supposedly getting quotes from her, but something didn't seem right. Sometimes Patty would be flushed when I came into the office, and often they would drink beer. Of course, I joined them for a beer and we talked, but something didn't feel right. Finally, I decided to disable the local alarm ringer. Usually, when someone entered the building through any of the doors, a bell would ring. I turned off the bell at the warehouse entrance. Yesterday, before I walked into my father's store, I was a loving husband with a wife I would die for and 2 friends I loved. I had a successful construction business and a bright future. I was waiting for my wife and I to have a child. Today, I am an embittered bastard determined to destroy my wife and friends. Oh, I'm not going to do anything that will get me in jail, but hell, who knows? I can break down and go crazy. I think you want to know why I changed so much overnight. Well, I didn't change overnight, but I started worrying a few months ago and changed instantly. Listen to my sad story and follow me on the path of revenge. Last night, as I was driving by the store, I saw Joe and George's trucks in the parking lot. I turned into the parking lot and walked to the door with the bell off. I knew what I would find before I got to Patty's office. I heard her moans and screams from the middle of the building. I pulled out my phone and turned on the camera. The damn bitch didn't even close the office door. I watched and took pictures as they had sex. George walked over to Patty and helped her up. He pulled her towards him and kissed her on the lips, and then said, "Come on, honey. Take off your clothes. I want to play with your breasts." I watched and took pictures while George helped Patty undress. I moved away from the door so that they would not see me until the right moment. I remembered that there was usually a tape recorder in my father's office, and I went to have a look. I wanted to record their conversation if I could. I found the recorder and returned. I placed it on the floor near the door and continued to watch as my wife served two former friends. I was even more angry about their conversation, which was recorded on a tape recorder. I heard Joe say, "Damn, Patty, are you glad you let me fuck you again at the Christmas party 2 years ago? I told you this would be the best sex of your life, didn't I? I was talking to Jared the other day and told him about the hot babe I'm having sex with, and he wants to meet you. Are you sure you won't let him come over one night?" Patty pushed him away and turned to him. "No, I like having sex with you too, I love it, but I don't want anyone else. I didn't like him in school, and I don't like him now. The only time he had me was before I married Stan. He was a jerk. He hurt me and didn't even try to make me enjoy myself. I always enjoyed my time with you before marriage, and I still do. If you can keep your mouth shut, we can continue this forever, but you have to. Be careful. Stan is already starting to get angry about the way you two act when he sees you ... If you don't cool down, I'll have to stop this." I decided I had recorded enough and took enough photos. When I was in my father's office, I took a baseball bat. I was going to teach Joe and George a lesson. I picked up the bat and headed into the room when a thought occurred to me. George has always been very jealous. He was married to his high school sweetheart. She and I met several times. They didn't really get serious until Patty and I got engaged. I enjoyed sex with her, so I wondered if I should try seducing her before dealing with him. In fact, that would probably be better retribution than just beating him up. He always cried at school when they fought and hated it when I dated her. I quietly retreated from the room and left the building. I installed the alarm and reconnected the doorbell wires as soon as I left. I couldn't wait for Patty and her two friends to set off the alarm as they left the store. The alarms were turned off using keypads located at the doors, and motion sensors were installed in the main part of the building so that before they could detect that the alarm was activated, it would already have gone off. I knew Patty would be able to disable the alarm, but the damage would have already been done. She would wonder how she turned on and would have to wait for the police. I wonder if Joe and George will be smart enough to leave before the police arrive. Patty returned home very late. She entered the house and nervously approached me. I looked at her face and she seemed scared. I chuckled to myself and asked, "What's wrong, honey? You seem nervous and came back much later than usual." Patty licked her lips and sat on the edge of the chair opposite me. She said, "I was late at work. We couldn't balance the books, and I thought I'd never find the problem. What were you doing tonight? I thought you'd come in or at least call since I was so late." "No, I'm already used to your late returns and didn't want to come over for a beer with you and your friends." Patty's face turned pale, then she blushed. "Damn you, Stan. I keep telling you there's nothing between us. Joe and George weren't even there. Why can't you understand that I need to communicate with clients to keep them happy?" "Okay, honey," I said. "I know you have to fawn over customers. I was just driving by around 6:30 and thought I saw their trucks there." Well, they were there then. They came almost to closing time, and I waited for them to pay and upload their orders before I started doing the bookkeeping. They left shortly after closing. I just meant that they weren't all there. Time while I was there. I'm tired. I'll go take a hot bath and go to bed. I grinned and said, "Great. I'll join you soon. I've been excited all day." Patty looked worried and said, "No, sorry, honey. I'm really tired. Let's do this in the morning before work." I just chuckled to myself. I thought that I would grow cold towards her and the world. I wondered how many times I had received secondary pleasure without knowing it. I also made a mental note to get my health checked for infections. I just said that to annoy Patty. The next morning, I left before Patty woke up. As soon as my lawyer's office opened, I called and made an appointment. He agreed to meet me at noon if I bought him lunch. I agreed, and we had a quick lunch at a cafe next to his office. He wanted to discuss the problem over lunch, but I asked that we discuss it in his office. He said, "Sure, but what could be so secret that it can't be discussed here? I often conduct business over lunch." I just said that this concerns my business, and I don't want the information to spread until everything is ready. When we returned to his office, I began to explain the problem. I said I wanted a divorce immediately based on Patty's infidelity, and I wanted the prenuptial agreement to be followed to the letter. I showed him the photographs and let him listen to the recording. I also asked that he only show photos of Joe and Patty and not use the recording unless necessary. "Why do you want to leave George out of this?" he asked. "Well, I'm not sure you'll like it, but after the divorce, I have plans for George. I don't want to warn him and—" Lawrence, the lawyer, interrupted me. "Hold on, buddy. I hope you're not planning anything violent. As a court officer, it's my responsibility to report this." I laughed and said, "No, I'm not planning violence. I once dated George's wife, Susan. They broke up several times, and twice I dated her during their breakups. They almost always go to Murphy's Tavern on the weekends. I think I'll try to get closer to Susan to make George angry. I want to give her information about his cheating, but first I want to play with his mind, and I'll get some retribution. He always got so angry when she dated anyone. To others, and I heard that he gets jealous when she dances with others for too long. I want to see if I can seduce her after the divorce and let him know about it. I also intend to try to seduce her, Joe's fiancée. There won't be any violence unless these idiots start first. Stan, I don't like this. It might backfire on you, but you're right. There's nothing illegal about seducing a woman, but they can sue you for alienation of love." I laughed and said, "Let them try. I'll countersue and I have photos and tape for the case. Do you think it'll be a close call?" Lawrence thought for a moment. Finally, he said, "Yes, it's possible the lawsuits will balance out if they are filed, but you need to remember that you may have more assets than them. Even if both suits are won in court, you may end up worse off financially. Situation if a ruling is made against you. Besides, don't you think this is disgusting behavior towards these women? I think it will hurt them anyway if they find out about their men's betrayal. If you use them in this way, that's for sure, will cause them more pain." My heart was made of stone. I said, "I don't care. They chose those cheating assholes." On Wednesday, I received a call from Lawrence. He said the divorce was ready to be filed, and he was going to serve Patty with the papers this afternoon. "Great," I said. "I'll start changing the locks on the doors in the morning. I'll pack as many of her clothes as I can and leave them on the porch. I'll put pictures of her and Joe on each door so she can see them when she comes." Oh, I don't know who was more angry when the scandal broke out in my father's store. I received a call from 3 very angry people within minutes of delivering the papers to Patty. She called and threw a tantrum, then said that I would regret my birth. Dad called right after she left the store. Her father called and cursed me right after I hung up after talking to my father. When I spoke to my father, I said, "Dad, I really have to thank you for insisting on this prenuptial agreement. I filed for divorce because I caught Patty having sex in her office with Joe and George. I have photos and recordings. Thanks to you, I will keep my home and business, as well as 3/4 of our assets. I think you should change the locks on the store and the passwords on the computers in case she decides to do something we don't like. I suggest we fire her, but that's your decision. You need to decide if she can be trusted after this." Damn, son. I just can't believe it. Right here in the store. Okay, I'll get the girls to work on changes to the computer and stuff. We'll come back tonight to talk. When my father and mother came to see me in the evening, they were depressed. Mom especially loved Patty. She was the daughter they never had. I convinced them it was best to fire Patty. I said I really believed she could hurt the business if she stayed put. The next morning, when Patty found out that she had lost not only her husband, but also her job, she became very angry. The following Monday, I received a counterclaim for divorce, and my father received a claim for wrongful termination. Looks like we were going to spend a lot of money on Lawrence because of this mess. We decided to conduct an external audit of the business. I was sitting at the bar on Tuesday night when Glenda walked in. Like most friends in our city, she didn't ask if she could join me, but simply plopped down in the booth across from me. "What have I heard about you and Patty?" she asked. I said, "Depends on what you heard, but I'm guessing most of the rumors are true. I caught her and Joe having sex in her office after work the other day. I have pictures and I've filed for divorce. They say in town that you were just jealous of her male friends and filed for divorce. She also says that you acted vindictively and forced your father to fire her so she couldn't live." I laughed and said, "Well, Dad did fire her, but that was because she did what she did in the office, and because he asked our accountant to check the books. I can't say what they found, but she made a few more mistakes. Can we just forget about it?" "Yeah, I'm sorry that happened. I know how you feel. Damn Joe did the same thing to me, you know. The idiot could never keep his stuff in his pants when he was home." I saw a small tear roll down Glenda's cheek. I reached over and wiped it off her face, then said, "Yeah, I think he's had most of the girls he's dated and a lot of other men's wives. That's partly why I didn't want Patty flirting with him or being alone with him. I really didn't think he would do this to a friend." Glenda and I had a couple of beers and chatted, then I walked her to the car. Before she sat down, she kissed me tenderly on the cheek. "Everything will work out, Stan, I promise." The days dragged on, work came and went. Some of my friends supported me through my grief, some supported Patty and were no longer friends. The father's dismissal trial was scheduled to begin Monday. I was at home on Sunday when I heard a voice calling me from the direction of the house. I must admit that I did not get up to greet the visitor. I actually fell on my butt trying to get up. I've been talking to John Barleycorn all day, and I'm afraid he tripped me. Well, to be precise, when I was trying to get up from the Adirondack chair, I tripped my leg and fell on my butt. There I lay in a puddle of Glen Morangi spill, looking up at one of my best supporters. Glenda stood there laughing at me. She crouched down to help me up, and I saw something I hadn't seen in months. I looked at the beautiful, smooth, feminine thighs. Unfortunately, Glenda saw where I was looking and said, "Damn it, Stan. Put your eyes back where they belong." She turned her knees away from me and extended her hand. "Here, give me your hand. I'll help you get up. Can you even stand on your own?" I have to admit, I giggled more than I laughed when I said, "Well, I thought I could, but here I am, lying at your feet, trying to do it." Before she could help me up, Glenda laughed loudly at my comment. She helped me up, and I was able to more or less stand up on my own after we stopped laughing. I invited her to sit in one of the chairs opposite me and almost fell back into mine. Glenda became an almost permanent guest in my home. Besides my mother, she was almost the only woman who visited me, and I appreciated her company. Unfortunately, I didn't really want to see anyone today, and I'm afraid that affected our conversation. Finally, Glenda looked at me and asked, "Stan, did I do something to make you angry? I know it's mostly my fault that you looked up my skirt when you came over." I felt my heart clench and my eyes begin to water. I was in pain and couldn't speak. I made a face and simply shook my head at Glenda. "No," I whispered. "You're almost the only one who still comes." Today, I felt sorry for myself. I was also thinking about the trial tomorrow. A few months ago, I thought I had everything: a loving wife, a great business, the American dream. Now all that I have is this broken heart, a broken marriage, and I'm facing legal battles to keep my and my family's assets. I'm so angry at life and what Patty has done that I've alienated most of my friends. All I know is that I want to hurt Patty, Joe and George and Patty's parents so much that they'll regret ever or they knew me. That's almost all I think about. I have plans, and they are not very pleasant. I know when I fulfill them, you will leave too, and damn it, I don't want it, but I can't help it. I want to punish these bastards, and I know it will hurt me too. Glenda stood up from her chair and sat on my lap. She hugged me and just held me. I felt her soft breasts pressing against my chest and remembered that she was not wearing any underwear. I felt Glenda change position and heard her gasp. Why, Stan? Why do you think I'll leave if you take revenge on those bastards? We're friends for life, aren't we? What are you planning to do that's so terrible? And I still don't understand why you're mad at George. Simple. I haven't told anyone, but George was one of Patty's lovers, so I owe him one. I'm going to seduce their women like they seduced mine. Glenda pulled away from me and looked into my eyes. What? Stan, you're not going to. What do you mean? And you still haven't told me why you want to hurt George. Simple. I haven't told anyone, but George was one of Patty's lovers, so I owe him one. I'm going to seduce their women like they seduced mine. Stan, you can't do this. What about the poor women? It hurts them too much. Stan, please don't do this. It will break their hearts when they find out that you were just playing with them. They are already suffering. Just being with these cheating scumbags. Glenda pulled away from me and stood up. She looked at me and said, Stan, you're right. If you do something that terrible, I don't know what I'll do, but... Glenda turned and walked away from my yard. I heard her car drive away shortly after. My divorce moved quickly. Since we had a good prenuptial agreement, everything was quite simple. I was just waiting for the court to complete the process. But litigating a wrongful termination claim was a different matter. We were all nervous when the trial began. Lawyer Patty made monsters out of my father and me. He twisted our every word and tried to insert his own. Finally, things started to change when our lawyer started asking questions. He drew attention to how much time Patty spent flirting with clients. He called witnesses both inside and outside the company to corroborate her behavior. He mentioned that she regularly drank beer in the store, and while it wasn't illegal to do so away from a work area, he made it seem like she was neglecting her responsibilities to do so. Lawrence called his father's accountant, and this witness caused significant damage to Patty. The accountant said Patty allowed Joe and George to exceed their preset spending limits and gave them extra time to pay. In fact, their bills were 3 months overdue, and they were only making token payments. Patty's attorney then asked about my large credit bill and how I had not been paying it off every month as the business required other clients to do. My father said that was true, but that he had made a special deal with me and took an ownership interest in my buildings to protect the business in case I couldn't pay. He received the cost of the materials I purchased for the buildings, plus 3% of the ownership for an advance on the materials. He stressed that Patty not only exceeded her authority by allowing Joe and George increased loans, but also did not try to protect the business in the event of their default. The hearing finally concluded after 2 days of testimony. When the decision was made, Patty and her father were almost held in contempt of court. They complained loudly that the decision was not in her favor. The judge said, Mrs. Tramaine, you are lucky that your father-in-law has decided not to take this case to the authorities. I think he could bring a case of criminal negligence, perhaps even theft, against you and your 2 accomplices. I suggest you leave the courtroom and think about the kindness these people showed you. If they countersued, I'm sure they could win a significant recovery from you. Patty and her father stormed out of the courtroom, their faces white with anger. As I was leaving the courtroom, Lawrence stopped me and said, Stan, I have good news for you. A few minutes before the hearing this morning, I received notice that the judge had signed divorce papers. In 30 days, your marriage will be dissolved. Do you want me to mail you the documents, or will you pick them up? That evening, my parents and I were sitting on their patio, relaxing after court. We were both happy and sad at the same time. We were glad that everything went without serious consequences, and we were sad about how my marriage and his relationship with Patty ended. We had had a barbecue and were now sitting with our drinks, just relaxing. In fact, we all felt the effects of alcohol. I was going to tell my parents how bitter I was. I said, I still can't believe my friends would do this to me, let alone Patty. If I need it my whole life, I'll make them pay for this. My mother looked at me in shock and said, Oh, Stan, please don't do this. A man who lives with bitterness is a pathetic man. Take the right path and live your life to the fullest. In the long run, it will make you happy. a more fulfilling life, and maybe even make these three regret what they did. We heard soft footsteps on the sidewalk, and then a woman's voice said, "Thank you, Mrs. Tremaine. That's exactly what I tried to convince him to do. If anyone can understand his pain, it's me, and I think I've gotten over it." At first I was the same as Stan. I wanted not only to punish Joe. Step by step, as time went on, I began to let go of my anger and desire for revenge. One day I realized that I no longer cared. I'm a better person in every way without that cheating bastard. Glenda walked fully onto the patio and looked straight at me. She continued, "Stan, I know how empty you feel right now. I know the feelings that still burn inside you, but believe me, dwelling on them only makes them worse. Please, please let go of the anger and start living again. Next time, be more careful. Be more confident in who you choose as friends and the woman you take into your heart. If you were honest with yourself and admitted that hindsight is always clearer, I think you would see that. The seeds of this broken love were sown before I married Patty. I know I could and still see it in Joe. He always looked at other women and always talked to them. He was always more attentive to them when we were together than to me, but I thought I loved him. I know you said that Patty was very similar. She always flirted with other men and enjoyed their attention. Look into your heart and use this knowledge to become a better person, to their level, and don't hurt anyone. It won't make you feel better in the long run." I looked at Glenda. She stood looking at me, and I could have sworn there were tears in her eyes. The sun was behind her, and her thin dress hid almost nothing. I could see the outline of her very feminine, very desirable body and felt my body react. With great effort, I turned away from her. I felt a flash of self-loathing. Here I am, not yet completely divorced, and already drooling over my friend. Glenda continued the conversation. "Sorry for just popping in unannounced, but I was on my way to the tavern and wanted to congratulate you on your success today. I have to admit, the phone lines were ringing tonight with the news of your success in court." Glenda smiled at all of us and then continued, "I'll go, but, well, be careful and don't. Oh hell, I already heard that Patty has friends who are spreading rumors and making threats about you. I just wanted you to be careful and look after yourself. If you drink too much, oh damn, I'll just go." Glenda turned and quickly walked outside to her car. We all just sat and looked at each other. To say that we were shocked is to say nothing. Mom said it best when she said, "Oh, I just can't believe it. How could anyone? Why would anyone be so mad at us?" We continued the conversation for some time without touching on anything important. I decided I was sober enough to go home. I was getting ready to leave when the phone rang. Mom went to answer. I heard her say, "Oh no, when? Well, he'll come as soon as he can." She left the house crying and ran to her dad. She said, "Cedric, it was the police. The store's alarm went off, and they want you to come and turn it off and see if anything is missing. They said the first patrolman on the scene said almost all the windows were broken. Oh, Cedric, how could someone do this to us?" Dad and I went to the store. When we arrived, 2 patrol cars were waiting for us. We went in and turned off the alarm. We walked around the store and didn't find anything obviously missing, but told the officers we'd need to take an inventory to be sure. Some goods inside were damaged by thrown stones. We called my mom and asked her to bring sleeping bags so we could spend the night in the store. We called the insurance company early the next morning and then arranged for the glass to be replaced. Later that evening, I returned home to find that several of my windows were broken as well. I called the police and reported the vandalism. Of course, they asked their questions, and when they asked if I knew anyone who could do it, I said, "A few months ago, I would have said no, but now, especially after what I was told late last night and what happened last night, I think maybe yes. I just got divorced because I caught my wife cheating with 2 of my friends. She was an assistant manager at my parents' store. When I filed for divorce, my dad fired her. He checked the books, found many violations. She filed a wrongful termination claim against him, and he won the case yesterday. A friend told my parents and me that my ex-wife and 2 ex-friends threatened us. Now I think maybe one of them, or Her family may be involved. I know her father was extremely angry about all this and cursed me several times. Of course, we said something similar when the police took statements at the store. Now I was more confident that we were on the right track. After the vandalism, life returned to normal, or at least as normal as it could after the hole that was ripped out of our lives when Patty left it. My parents tried to return to their old life, but I struggled. Sometimes I managed, but usually when I got home, I would remember Patty and the evenings would become a nightmare. When I was working, I was able to function normally, but the lonely times were terrible as I hadn't been truly alone all night for several years. I started going to a cafe for dinner almost every evening. I usually ate at one of the sports bars or local fast food joints, so I started drinking more than before. Of course, this only exacerbated my loneliness and anger at Patty and her lovers. Sometimes I saw some of my workers or friends who were still with me. They tried to cheer me up and reduce the amount of drinking, but I didn't let them. Sometimes I would meet Glenda, and she would try to convince me to let it all go. One Thursday evening, I saw a group of women sitting around a table, drinking and having fun. One of the women caught my attention. It was Susan, George's wife. As far as I knew, no one knew that George was one of Patty's lovers. I remembered my promise to make him pay and walked up to the table. I leaned over and said, "Hi, Susan. Long time no see. Will you dance with me?" Susan looked at me with a frown on her face, then smiled. "Of course, Stan," she said. I smiled and took her hand, helping her up. Hugging her around the waist, we went to the dance floor. We had only been dancing for a few seconds when the song ended. She wanted to return to the table, but I held her back. I said, "Oh, come on, Sue. You promised me a dance, and before we even started, the song ended. Can't you give me a whole song?" Susan relaxed and smiled. She returned to my arms as the next song began, and we began to sway to the music. She sighed and said, "You've always been a good dancer. It's a shame George doesn't take me dancing more often. I always loved dancing when we were dating." She rested her cheek on my chest, and we swayed to the music until the end of the song. She wanted to return to the table again, but I held her hand. When she turned to me, I looked pitiful and said, "Another one, please, for old time's sake." Susan looked at her friends, then smiled a nervous smile and returned to my arms. During the dance, I said, "I don't want to make you nervous. Ever since. Well, since Patty left, I've been so lonely, and it's good to at least dance with someone again. Sometimes I don't know how I can stand it." Susan raised her head and said, "Well, Stan, it's your fault. If you weren't so jealous, you wouldn't have lost." I pulled my head back and stared at her. Before she could react, I hissed, "Jealous? In a way, yes, but I won't tolerate my wife having sex with my friends and not do anything about it. You're right, I kicked her out, and I would do it again, but I still miss her. I—" Now Susan interrupted me. She said, "What do you mean? I heard you just got mad at Patty for flirting and kicked her out of the house, and then filed for divorce." I stopped dancing and just held Susan as I explained what happened that night when I caught Patty. I left George out this time because I still wanted to hurt him by seeing his wife with someone else. When I finished, Susan looked at me and said, "Stan, I just can't believe this. I know Joe is a womanizer, but even he wouldn't do that to a friend. I've known Patty all my life, and she's not like that. Are you sure you really saw it?" Now I was furious. I said, "Yes, I know what I saw. If you don't believe me, come to my house and I'll show you the pictures." I turned and started to walk away when Susan grabbed my arm. "Stan, I'm sorry, but, well, George said you were just. I remembered that I still had photos on my phone. I really wasn't thinking when I pulled it out and said, 'Here, look at these pictures and tell me Patty or my friends couldn't do this.'" I gave the phone to Susan and stood there while she scrolled through the photos. I heard her gasp when she saw the first photo of Joe and Patty. I forgot about George. I remembered his photos were on my phone when I heard Susan scream and saw her stop scrolling through the photos. She looked at the photo Then tears began to flow down her cheeks. I saw her move to the next photo and start crying. She dropped the phone and ran to her friends. Now I feel like scum. I ran after Susan, but her friends stopped me. One of them said, "What did you do to her? I thought you were a friend. Why is she crying?" I pushed my way through the two women and knelt down next to Susan. I took her hand and said, "Susan, I'm sorry. When you didn't believe me, I got angry and decided to prove that I wasn't lying. I forgot there were pictures of George on the phone. One of her friends grabbed my phone from the floor and started looking at the photos. Cowhat photos. Oh my God. This bastard. All the women, except the one who tried to calm Susan, gathered around my phone to look at the photos. They were all muttering quietly, and I could tell they weren't sure who to be more angry at, me or George. Finally, Susan looked at me and said, "Just go away, Stan. Please leave me alone." I stood up and took the phone from the woman. I slowly left and drove back home. I felt terrible. I really liked Susan, and now I was the cause of her unhappiness. I wondered how I could ever think that my plan for her was the right one. I was sick of the pain I caused her by simply letting her see the photos. How much worse would it have been if I had put her to bed and then sent the photos to George before showing them to her? I was sitting on my patio drinking whiskey when I heard a car drive into my driveway. I didn't move even when I heard a car door slam and someone knocking on my front door. I took another sip and sat looking at my little piece of heaven. I could make out the silhouettes of trees in the moonlight. Finally, I heard someone walking across the yard and a voice shouted, "Stan, where the hell are you? I know you're home. I see your car in the garage. Stan, I'm not leaving until you talk with me. Open the door." As she spoke, the woman walked to the back door and began knocking on it. Finally, I couldn't stand it anymore and said, "Okay, stop knocking on my house. I'm here. What do you want?" I turned and saw Glenda walking towards me. "Damn you, Stan. I just came from the bar and grill. Did you really have to hurt Susan like that? You just couldn't leave it alone, right? I should have beaten you up." I sat and looked at Glenda, then grabbed her hand as she swung at me. While I was struggling with her, trying to keep her from hitting me, she lost her balance and fell into my lap. I quickly hugged her and held her, saying, "Glenda, stop. If you don't stop, I'm afraid one of us will get hurt. Look, I'm sorry I upset Susan tonight. It wasn't intentional. I was thinking about what you said and just danced with her." She began to reproach me for the way I treated poor Patty, and I lost control. She said that I got what I deserved for my jealousy. Without thinking, I told her that I had photos of Joe and Patty. On the phone, I forgot that there were also pictures of George, and when I gave her the phone to look at it, she saw it, of course, and she started crying. She and her friends told me to leave, and I left. Everyone I talked to about my revenge plan discouraged me from seducing women. I had already decided not to do it. I know I hurt her, but I just didn't think or do it on purpose. At the same time, I didn't think she deserved to know what a jerk and a cheater George is. Of course, if she was smarter, she would have realized it by now. She caught him cheating enough times while we were at school to know he was cheating. Once a cheater, always a cheater, you know. Glenda was still struggling, but had calmed down considerably. Finally, I felt her relax even more, and she demanded to be released. I carefully loosened the hug, and she moved to one of the chairs. I could tell she was looking at me. I heard a sigh, then she said, "Stan, I don't know what to believe." When I got to the bar and grill, Susan and her friends were gone, but everyone I talked to said you were a creep for her. They said you were dancing, and then she pulled away from you and ran to her desk, crying. I just thought, are you sure you didn't do anything to her? I took out my phone and tossed it to Glenda. "Here," I said. "Call her yourself and ask her what I did." All I did was forget about the photos on my phone, and she saw them. I didn't. We heard the roar and squeal of tires. Almost immediately after this, the sound of an impact was heard. Then we heard a car door open and slam shut. We heard running footsteps and a man's voice shouting, "Stan, you son of a bitch." Get out here. I'll kill you, you son of a bitch. We heard a crash and footsteps stomping through my house. The lights began to turn on as the person moved from room to room. I saw George swinging at my things as he walked through the house. Finally, he came back into the kitchen and saw Glenda and I on the patio. He didn't even open the sliding screen door. He just walked through it and walked towards me. I got up from my chair to meet him. I jumped back in time to see him swing a tire iron at me. "You motherfucker," he shouted. "You shouldn't have shown Susan those damn pictures. It's not my fault you couldn't keep your bitch. But no, you were always trying to take Susan away from me. Even in school, you did everything to take her away. Now you've ruined my marriage, and this time you will pay, you bastard. She kicked me out of the house tonight and said that you showed her these damn photos. You didn't understand anything about the fact that your house and store were destroyed. Apparently, now we have to destroy you." George swung the tire iron again, and this time hit me in the shoulder. Damn, that hurt. Fortunately, it was a glancing blow. I could barely hear Glenda talking on the phone as I dodged George's punches. I managed to place a chair between us, and after another blow from him, I raised it to use as a shield, perhaps as a weapon. George continued to swing the tire iron and hit the chair. He was so angry that he cried while yelling at me. Glenda tried to calm him down, and he turned to her. "Shut up, bitch," he shouted at her. "I'd guess you're out there somewhere. Birds of a feather flock together, don't they? What, are you here to celebrate yet another meanness to Joe?" George swung at Glenda, and the edge of the tire iron caught on her blouse, tearing it. He stumbled and almost fell. As he stumbled, we heard the sirens of approaching police cars. We heard the squeal of brakes, and the officers walked across the yard, following the sounds of a fight. As the officers entered the patio, George regained his balance and moved toward me again. This time, as he got closer, he lunged and swung the tire iron from above. I was backing away and trying to lift the heavy chair to block the blow when my foot caught on the edge of the flower bed. I lost my balance and fell backwards. The chair fell on me, and I felt a lot of pain as George tripped and fell on top of me. He released the tire iron, but still tried to hit me. The officers approached us and grabbed George. They quickly handcuffed him. One of the officers led him to the car. Another officer pushed back his chair and helped me stand up. "Are you okay, sir?" he asked. I stood there, breathing heavily. I started to shake and felt a crying Glenda hug me. I looked at the officer and said, "Yeah, I think we're okay. He hit me a few times, but nothing serious. Give us a minute, please." I turned to Glenda and hugged her. I ran my hand through her hair and down her back. I said, "Hush, Glenda, it's okay. It's over, honey. Calm down, okay?" Finally, I felt Glenda relax. She stopped shaking from sobbing and just held on to me. I leaned over and gently kissed the top of her head, then turned to the officer. "Okay, I think she's calmed down. Can we continue?" I looked up and saw a couple of people in civilian clothes approaching the yard. They already had notepads and cameras. It took 2 hours to testify and show the damage to the house. George drove into Glenda's car when he arrived, so we had to fill out reports on that too. We found out that he was drunk as a cobbler when he arrived. It looks like he'll be facing multiple charges: drunk driving, burglary, assault, and possibly attempted murder. By the time all the officers had left, Glenda was still holding on to me and crying quietly as we sat on the couch. I looked at my watch and saw that it was almost 3 a.m. I sat holding Glenda tenderly until she fell asleep. I stood up and picked her up. I carried her to the guest room and laid her on the bed. I took off her shoes and covered her with a blanket, then went to my room by myself. The next morning, I was still asleep at 10 a.m. when I heard a knock on the destroyed front door, then footsteps across the living room and down the hallway. I jumped out of bed and hid behind the door, in case it was ill-wishers. The steps were approaching, and I heard voices, female and male. Finally, I recognized them and came out of hiding to meet my father and mother. Susan was with them. All three of them flinched when I emerged from hiding. Susan and Mom gasped when they saw me, and Dad said, "Damn, Stan, You look terrible. Are you okay, son? My left arm was hanging almost lifeless from the bruise, and I knew I needed to get an x-ray. I had a few scratches and was pretty dirty because I didn't even wash myself before bed the night before. I smiled and said, "Yeah, I guess so. My arm hurts like hell and the house is a mess, but at least I'm alive." Susan came up to me and hugged me. She looked me in the eyes and said, "Oh, Stan, I'm so sorry. It's all my fault. When that drunk, cheating bastard came home last night, I didn't even let him in. I put some of his clothes in a suitcase and threw them on the porch. I told him we were done and told him to leave. I'm so sorry I told him I saw the pictures on your phone. I didn't know he was going to try to kill you, Stan." While she was talking, Glenda came up to us. She stood behind her parents and Susan, looking at us. She came and stood next to me. Her face looked scared as she gently touched my left hand. She gasped as I winced in pain and stepped back. She wanted to leave, but I hugged her. She tensed, then relaxed and pressed herself against me. All three of my guests were looking at us. I said, "Glenda was here when George arrived." I looked at Susan and continued, "She was scolding me for how I treated you when George broke into my yard and crashed into her car. She saw the whole mess and almost got hurt when George tried to hit her with a tire iron." As I was saying this, I noticed that Glenda's blouse was still torn, and as she moved, I could see her breasts covered by her bra. What really bothered me was the blood on her white blouse. I quickly turned her towards me and retreated. I tore her blouse, saying, "Damn, are you really hurt? Sorry, Glenda, I didn't know that bastard actually hit you. Why didn't you say you were hurt?" Glenda grabbed her blouse and tried to cover it up as I leaned over to see how cut it was. She stepped away from me and stood with her face turned to the side. "Stan, it's okay. It only grazed the skin a little. It's like a graze, no more than 2 inches. I'm fine, Stan." Mom and Susan grabbed Glenda and dragged her to the bathroom. I heard my mother say, "Come with me, Glenda. It doesn't matter if it's just a graze, it needs to be treated. We also need photographs in case the police need it." Dad and I looked at each other, then went to the kitchen to make coffee. We were sitting on the patio drinking our first cup when the women returned. Glenda was wearing one of my shirts. She placed the chair next to mine before sitting down. We all sat and drank coffee, discussing the events of the previous night. During the conversation, I learned that Susan had read about George's arrest in the newspaper. The article only said that I was injured, without details. She rushed to my parents' house to find out how injured I was. They had already seen the article and called the police for information. They were going to my place when she arrived, so she went with them. They said they tried to call me but didn't get an answer. This, of course, made me look for my phone. I couldn't find him, so I asked my mom to call. We heard the bell and found him lying in a flower bed near where I fell. Apparently, Glenda dropped it when George attacked her. After we found the phone, the women went to prepare dinner. I realized that I was dying of hunger. I didn't have dinner the night before and didn't have breakfast. I took a hot shower while they prepared dinner. When I was done, I made Glenda take a shower. After she returned, we had lunch and discussed what had happened until mid-afternoon. I don't know how many calls I received from friends and coworkers checking on my condition. I had several visitors who stopped by to make sure I was okay. The only call that really bothered me was from my ex. She didn't introduce herself, but I got her parents' numbers, so all she said before hanging up was, "You're a lucky bastard." The next week, everything was back to normal. I renovated the house and continued my business. If anything, this little incident helped me. I have received several requests for estimates because clients read in an article that I run a construction business. Now I have another problem. Well, that's not really a problem, I guess. I have this stubborn woman who constantly comes to check on me to see if I'm eating well. I have to admit, it's great to come home and find Glenda waiting for me. Finally, I gave in and gave her the key. Now I come home to find dinner ready and a smiling, stunning woman ready to set the table and dine with me. I'm thinking about making it permanent, but I'm still hesitant. The past and all the recent events haunt me. But every evening when I come home and see Glenda, my heart fills with warmth and confidence. She cares for me with such sincere attention that I feel ashamed of my doubts. One evening, a few weeks after the incident, we were sitting on the terrace enjoying a quiet evening. Glenda served us dessert, and we talked about the future. I shared my thoughts and fears, and she, looking me straight in the eyes, said, "Stan, I'm here because I want to be with you. I see more in you than you sometimes see in yourself. The past is the past, and I believe we can build something better together." Her words touched me to the core. I realized that everything that happened only strengthened our connection. Glenda saw me in the most difficult moments and stayed by my side. I realized that there was nothing to be afraid of anymore. The next day, I decided to take a step forward. I bought a ring and had dinner on the terrace. Under the starry sky, with music in the background and candles on the table, I got down on one knee and said, "Glenda, you have become my support and source of joy. I want to spend my whole life with you. Will you agree to be my wife?" She smiled, her eyes filled with tears of happiness. "Yes, Stan," she said, "I agree." At that moment, I realized that all the trials and difficulties we had gone through had led us to this happy ending. We hugged, and I knew we had a bright future ahead of us. Our wedding was small and cozy, only for those closest to us. We both continued to work and build our lives together. Glenda became not only my wife, but also a true friend and partner. Now, every evening, when I return home, I know that not just a home, but a family is waiting for me. And no matter what happens in the future, I am confident that we will get through it together. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click to